Welcome to another episode of M&A Plus, The Art After the Deal, where we explore the detailed world of mergers, acquisitions, and critical post-deal processes that define their success. Today, we are thrilled to host Peter Connor, the innovative mind behind the T-shaped lawyer concept, and a seasoned professional who has significantly shaped the way lawyers adapt and thrive in diverse roles beyond traditional legal boundaries. Peter brings a wealth of experience from both legal and business sectors. He has held roles as an associate at Baker & McKenzie, as an in-house general counsel, and has ventured beyond traditional legal duties into substantial business roles, including vice president of technical products and head of global compliance. Peter's innovative T-shaped lawyer program has been implemented in over 50 workshops at numerous corporations and law firms, significantly enhancing team dynamics and business outcomes. He has also won business leadership awards, recognizing his impactful fusion of legal expertise with business acumen. In today's discussion, we'll explore the T-shaped lawyer model, a transformative approach that encourages lawyers to develop deep legal expertise while also acquiring broad skills across various disciplines that focuses on working in the business, not just on the business. Thank you for joining us, Peter. It's a pleasure to have you as a guest on this podcast. I read your book, and you are someone that I actually look up to. You have been able to put some definitions around my own career and the services that I'm today delivering to my corporate customers. And I love the distinctions that you make between legal and business work, which we will discuss later. But first, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about your background and career path, and what was your inspiration for developing the T-shaped model?
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. And it's wonderful to be on your podcast. I've also been an admirer of you and your work that you're doing there. It's very exciting and very much T-shaped, what you and what your team are doing. Yeah, as you said, I started off like most people in a law firm in Sydney and then up in Hong Kong and went in-house and then moved into business roles. And I guess as I was based in Switzerland as the European General Counsel of Citrix at the time, and I wanted to move back to Sydney, Australia, which is where I am now, for personal reasons. And I was thinking, what do I do? I don't want to go back into the law again. And I was thinking, what do I love doing? And it's really, frankly, working with people to help them to see, I guess, a different way of working than the traditional way of working as a lawyer. And I stumbled upon this. As you said in our chat before the podcast, a lot of what I'm talking about is something that really good lawyers do, but it's actually not something that people spell out or call out. And that's what I've done, I think, hopefully, in the book, and what I do even further in my workshops and boot camps. So it's really taking those things that work for me from personal experience and kind of thinking about those and turning those into theories and ideas and crystallizing the thinking around the stuff that actually makes the difference in your career. What's the difference between the people who become general counsels and become partners in law firms and, frankly, those that don't? Likewise, what's the difference between lawyers who are really valued by their clients and those that aren't? And really, it's not about legal excellence. That's the takeaway. That's table stakes. You've got to be a good lawyer. You've got to know your stuff. But that's not the differentiator. The differentiator, it turns out from my career, and the more I talk to people, they tend to agree, is this business work and the business capabilities. So that's really the emphasis, the idea, what got me going. And we can talk a little bit more later about the T-shaped thing and why the T-shape. But that's essentially, Lisa, why I got into what I'm doing now, which is a legal team coach, working with top legal departments all over the world, helping them to reimagine what it means to be a legal team and what it means to be a lawyer.
So did you start thinking about these concepts early on in your career, or did it take some time to get to kind of that realization?
Yeah, so I suppose it's sort of people ask me, how long did it take to write the books? And I say, actually, the book writing itself was only like a year and a bit, the 2 books. But it actually took me 40 years of working and practice I was thinking about these ideas. I kind of knew that the way I was working was a little bit different because clients would tell me that. and they'd give me feedback. But it didn't dawn on me, frankly, until towards the end of my career, when I won the sort of Sun Microsystems CEO, the Business Leadership Award, the only lawyer to win that award, 6 people in a 25,000 company, Fortune 100 company at the time. And that was sort of, I guess, the light bulb moment where I was nominated for this award. And famously, the then CEO of Sun, Scott McNeely, didn't particularly like lawyers. He loved engineers, he loved salespeople. And so I thought, well, look, my chances of winning this are pretty slim. And I went through the interview process with all the members of the C-suite, and it was terrific getting that feedback. You don't normally have that opportunity to get feedback in a big company like that from such senior people. And the consistent feedback was, yeah, the sort of work I was doing, which wasn't legal work, it was business work, and we'll talk about that later, was what really stood out. And what they said was what they want, their lawyers, and frankly, they want all their executives to do, to move outside of the lane, the sort of narrow siloed lane. And it got up to McNeely, and, he famously said to me words to the effect of what he really liked was the fact that, I wasn't like a typical lawyer, and I looked for problems and opportunities outside of the legal lane, and I would go about trying to go and get those solved and fixed. And I can give you some examples later on about that, what that looks like. And so that was the thing that won me the award, and it sort of confirmed that, yeah, this is really where the magic happens, sort of outside of the legal lane. Yes, you've got to be good at being a lawyer, but the magic happens outside there.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we get into some of those details about what a T-shaped lawyer is and how they work, how it works, I wanted to kind of set the stage a little bit, because you talk a little bit in your book about the current state of the legal profession and the future state, and you're seeing a lot of changes going on, which is one of the reasons why your model is so important, because it kind of, aligns with the changes that you see happening in the legal profession. So could you talk a little bit about your views on the legal profession in general and kind of where you see the future headed in that?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? In some ways, and I say this in the book, I think, is that in some ways there's been lots of change. You think about alternative legal service business providers. I mean, like your business is a great example. Like obviously the emergence of technology, and in particular recently, Gen AI, the rise of legal operations in legal departments, and so in all these new jobs, and which we're going to touch on a bit later on, which are not lawyer roles and business roles, and frankly the rise in prominence of these roles. The fact that general counsels are taking on formal responsibility for lots of areas other than law. So there's been a lot of change, but a lot of that change, I think, is primarily focused on digital change and process change, which is important. But there hasn't actually been a huge amount of change, frankly, in terms of, other than perhaps at the GC level, as I just mentioned, in terms of the work that lawyers do, the corporate lawyers I'm talking about here, and their capabilities to do new work. More or less, that hasn't changed a whole lot. And every time I go into a workshop with a team, I mean, unless they've changed role to a different role, they're more or less doing the same things. They might be doing it more efficiently, but they're more or less doing the same work. And their capability to do this other work, business work, is frankly hasn't moved on much. So I think that whilst it's fantastic that, Gen AI, and there's all this focus on legal operations, running legal teams like a business more efficiently, such as the sort of work you help your clients with, that's terrific and very important. What's missing is this, what I call human transformation, changing lawyers, the work they do and their capabilities to do different work. And that's what I focus on. And it's strange that there's virtually no one else focused on this. It's not necessarily, very profitable. There's not a lot of money in it, which is one of the reasons why I think it's so attractive to a legal team and to a lawyer, that if you understand these ideas, you can go and make these things happen. And there's various reasons why that's important, as I spell out in the book. That first book, The T-Shaped Lawyer, A New Vision for You and Your Work, spells out what a lawyer is, T-shaped lawyer is, and why it's so important. And there are many reasons, but primarily it's so that, lawyers can then thrive. And particularly if you think about Gen AI and the fact that increasingly Gen AI and other technologies can do tasks that lawyers currently do. I mean, that's now must be obvious to everyone. So surely the next question is, so what work will we do? What work could we do? What work should we be doing going forward? It's not the same work. If you think it's just the same work, then you're frankly very naive. So it's important to be talking about, what new work could you be doing? And that's what I talk about in the book. And that's what I dig into in detail in my, sort of boot camps.
It's a change that is going to impact what lawyers are actually doing. And the work that lawyers have been doing and expect to be doing is different than the type of work that you're talking about that is going to be more business impacting.
Yeah, exactly. I think, what's great is most people frame in the corporate legal world, particularly in-house, talk about doing more with less. That's kind of the common saying. Well, I don't think that's the right way to look at it. I think it's more, I would flip it around and say the idea is to do less so that you can do more. Do less of a lot of the stuff that you're currently doing that frankly you don't need to be doing. It's not really adding a lot of value. And we'll get back to that idea in a minute, so that you can do more work that does add value. And guess what? The work that does add more value happens to be business work. And we'll talk about that later.
Yeah. Do you see the business executives sort of demanding the change, or are they the ones actually influencing the way that lawyers are working, the change in the way that lawyers are working, and the way that they want them to work and the way that they want them to deliver?
It's a great question, Lisa. And it's one of the ironies that no, in general, not necessarily. I mean, they certainly have enhanced expectations, and particularly of the GCs. So I think one of the things they need to be mindful of is that at a GC level, I would say the answer is yes, they do have higher expectations of GCs. And so, GCs are in fact taking on a lot more formal responsibility for compliance, risk, privacy, you name it, sustainability, whatever. But it's almost like then there's people are saying, well, forgetting about what that means for the rest of the legal department. And surely that should be a bit of an indicator that the rest of the legal team needs to be thinking about these other business areas as well. So, but the irony is, no, the business, even in my own experience, so I was very much a T-shaped lawyer. That was the way I operated. And yet, if I asked my clients, what do they want? They would probably, their flippant answer would be, turn the contracts around more quickly, keep me out of jail, that sort of thing. And that's why surveys are I'm not a big fan of surveys. They don't really, help that much. And yet, when you do this other work, then they just love it and they really value it. So it's an irony. They don't actually ask for it. And part of the reason is they don't expect it. Because when you think about it, we've created this perception of lawyers as being lawyers, and we do legal work, and, we're lawyers, we're difficult to do business with, the Department of No, and all that kind of stuff. So there's this perception that sort of is a bit of an obstacle for, at least from their perception. They don't expect it, but they're really surprised, and they really appreciate it when you do this business work.
So let's move on to talking about the T-shaped lawyer. Let's understand kind of what that is. So I'll just ask you, so what is a T-shaped lawyer and who does it apply to? And how do you distinguish between an in-house lawyer versus a law firm lawyer?
Right. Good question. So most people think that a T-shaped lawyer is just someone who has developed some non-legal skills. That's actually how. A T-shaped lawyer is a business person, not just a lawyer, who provides business input and advice, not just legal advice, and does business work, not just legal work, for the benefit of the company, not just the department, the legal department or the firm. Mm-hmm. So that's my definition of what a T-shaped lawyer is. So it's really what you do. It's not what you're capable of doing that makes you a T-shaped lawyer. Mm-hmm. So it does apply differently. The good news is it does apply to both, as I kind of point out in the book. And it's easier for someone working in-house to be a T-shaped lawyer because they're close to the business they have almost a daily opportunity to engage in business partnering, which is the verb, not the noun, doing, not just being capable of doing. So they have more scope for doing it. But nevertheless, a lawyer working in a law firm can also engage in business partnering. So when they're thinking about the advice that they give, they're thinking about not just the legal risks and the legal problems, but the broader business risks and business problems. And there's a quote, I think I make it in that first book or in the second book, from Professor Wilkins at the Harvard Law Center, about how it's changing. It's no longer a case of clients coming to lawyers with legal questions and wanting legal answers. That's no longer really the way it works. I mean, or as I like to put it, and I say so in the book, companies don't have legal problems, they have business problems. And the legal component to that may be a small part or a big part. So in an M&A, it's a pretty high part, right? There's a lot of legal considerations and what have you. But for most of the stuff that lawyers work in, the law is a small issue. So obviously, it's a very simple idea that if you confine yourself to just spotting legal risks and issues and just doing legal work, you're limiting your value proposition to the client. Whereas if you go beyond that, you're expanding your value proposition, your ability to add value. So yeah, it can apply in both ways, but it applies differently given that there is a gap, as we were talking about earlier, between in-house law and law firm practice.
Right. Yeah, I hear some comments sometimes about, and you've sort of touched on this, from business people who have a business problem and they ask a lawyer and they get a lot of legal jargon thrown at them. And then they're like, I don't even know what to do with all this information. And the lawyer is basically expecting the business person to apply all of this kind of pretty complicated legal jargon to their business problem instead of interpreting all that into the environment that they're in and making it make sense. Because I see that happen a lot. Like, that's maybe one example of kind of that gap. Now, I think that might happen more often with a law firm lawyer, that because they're not close to the business, so they're going to be focused highly on legal advice and regulations. They know their sort of legal area up and down and the changes and all the regulations, and they're going to be very focused on that. In-house lawyers they only have one client, right? So they're already used to being around that one client, so they're going to know more. But still, even in-house lawyers will operate that way sometimes. And it's very unhelpful to the business people, right?
Yeah, and that's right. And that's, Lisa, that's exactly it. So, people often use these cliches like, you need to understand the business, you need to have business acumen, you need to be business minded, you need to be a business partner. And of course you do. All those things are obvious, but there's no, like I say, there's no gold star for that. That's like a minimum. If you don't understand the business, if you aren't business minded, if you aren't a business partner, then frankly, good, you're lucky to have a job in-house. That's not what I'm talking about with being a T-shaped lawyer. I'm talking about not being business minded, but having a business person mindset, which we'll talk about in a minute. Not just being a business partner, which is understanding the business and having a good relationship with the key business clients, but business partnering, the verb, not the noun, doing something, i.e. providing business input and advice, doing business work, not just legal work. It's not just about making your legal advice commercial. Of course that you should do that. It's about doing more than that. Over and above that, it's about providing business input and advice and doing business work. And so, so I think, the vast majority of in-house lawyers don't do that, at least not on a regular basis. Obviously, the ones that are more successful do it, but they don't think about it. As you and I were talking about earlier, it's just not something you think about. You kind of do it intuitively, you do it a little bit, and you kind of give it away for free, I say. It's not something that's marketed, it's not something that's measured, it's not something that's, it's spoken about really within the legal team. And that's what I do, is to try and shine a bright light on what I call the sort of the dark art of the practice of law. This is how you practice law effectively. And the best lawyers do it that way. Even the best law firm lawyers do it that way. They do. They just think about the business problem, and they're not just confining their thoughts and questions and ideas to legal issues. They go beyond that, and they frame their advice to clients with business considerations and with business input. They don't just give a legal answer. So that's the point. That's the difference.
Yeah. So I like the emphasis that you make on the outcome focus. And one of the ways that I would contribute to your theory and T-shaped lawyer and your method here of explaining it is that every business person, including the lawyer that is working in the business, if they can tie back their work and what they're doing to either revenue generation or increasing margin, then they're going to be able to make better decisions on how much time they're spending on something, for example, prioritizing the task. And maybe I'm talking a lot about things that I see because I work with contracts a lot. So the example would be, should I spend a lot of time scrutinizing a contract that's worth $1,000 or, something like that? Or should I be the best lawyer that I can possibly be and scrutinize every word and get it all perfect? That is something that I see sometimes, right? So to frame it in the outcome focus and to think of it that way, I think would put someone into a T-shaped lawyer mindset. Do you think so?
Yeah, definitely. It definitely will help, Lisa. And I think perhaps two other comments on that. You mentioned mindset at the end there, and that's actually the crucial thing. As I mentioned in my definition of a T-shaped lawyer is a business person, not just a lawyer. You are a lawyer, but you're a business person. And to be a business person, you've got to have, not just be business minded, not just understand the business, but to have what I call a business person mindset. And, you've read the book, so I've come up with this business person mindset, which is a similar idea to the growth mindset, which some of you may be familiar with. It's contrasted. So whereas the growth mindset is contrasted with a fixed mindset, a business person mindset is contrasted with just a lawyer mindset. And I explain in the book, the difference between that. And when I do boot camps with people, we assess the extent to which every member of the team, including the GC, has a business person mindset. And, no surprise, not everyone does have a business person mindset. But the good news is you can, just like with a growth mindset, you can do things to, adopt, you can change your mindset and you can adopt that mindset. And the more you do it, the easier and more natural it is to engage in business partnering, to do this business work, and it just happens naturally. Yeah, whereas if you don't have that mindset, it's very difficult to do this other work. You'll just end up focusing on legal stuff. So that's one point. And the second point, I think, around, I think it would be around a simple concept that I use in the book is think about how can you add value. Make that almost your sort of, primary change objective, both individually and as a legal team. And that's a word that's thrown around a lot, adding value. And I don't mean dollar value. It's about, basically doing things that are important from the point of view of the business and kind of doing stuff that's important. And that could be as simple at one end of the spectrum, could be simply raising a question or pointing out a business risk. Just that, simply you don't need extra time to do it, but that's adding value because if they haven't thought about something and you're helping to clarify their objectives, that's a really simple, easy way. And I call that business partnering. That's business input, business advice. And that's something, you can do, and good lawyers do it. They maybe don't do it as much as they should, but they can do it more. And then at the other end of the spectrum of client business work is idea of actually doing business work, the sort of stuff that I won the award, for, where you're literally identifying a problem and you're going after that problem, putting a team together, a cross-functional team together, and then helping to solve for that problem or exploiting an opportunity.
Right. Yeah. Let's talk about business work and legal work. But first, I want to say something. So one of the things that I notice that I observe in working in my field, the lawyers are more valued when they can do these things, and that is prioritize in a good way, like in a meaningful way, driving things and not sitting on things, or, business people drive things. That's what they do, right? So that's another behavior.
Mm.
And you don't always see it with the lawyers. They'll wait for you to ask them a question and they won't do anything else. But if you're driving that, you're immediately adding value if you're driving something to completion or to an outcome. People skills and emotional intelligence is another one. And I don't mean to be rude to any lawyers, but I run across lawyers that are very focused and they have no people skills. I mean, they're not friendly. They're very smart. They know a lot, but they're not really friendly. And it is kind of hard. You're kind of intimidated to ask them anything, or, so emotional intelligence to me is going to help you a lot also, as far as adding value goes, and then not being a roadblock. And I know you say that in a different way in your book. You say, get out of the way. But to me, those are kind of the top things that are going to help a lawyer add more value to the business as a behavioral.
Right. Well, now we're getting into the next question, which is sort of how, right? And the reason I wrote the first book, The T-Shaped Lawyer, A New Vision for You and Your Work, first, and then before I wrote the second book, The T-Shaped Lawyer Guidebook, a framework for your professional development, is because you can't answer the question of what you now need in order to be successful. And most people frame it in terms of skills. What non-legal skills? I mean, people know that it's what generally accepted. Legal knowledge and skills is no longer sufficient. I think that's generally accepted. By the way, it wasn't when I started, doing this legal team coach stuff 9-10 years ago. It certainly wasn't. I was, people looked at me like, what? You mean, you think I need these other things? Why do I need these other things? Now it's generally accepted. But and you'll see, and Lisa, you and I, we're on LinkedIn, we see this all the time. People are speculating, like, what do you think we need? Is it we need more empathy, we need more project management, whatever it is, And I say a couple of things about that. Firstly, you can't really, come up with a rational answer to that question until you first decide what sort of work that you want to do. If you want to just do legal work and be an I-shaped lawyer, then frankly, a lot of these non-legal skills you don't really need in a corporate legal environment, setting. Whereas, and when I'm talking about skills, I'm talking about things like project management, like process improvement, like design thinking, those sorts of things. They are genuinely skills. And that's the second point. Not everything's a skill. People talk about so-called human skills. Well, guess what? Human skills are not skills. They're qualities. Empathy, emotional, those sorts of things. Creativity, resilience, adaptability. All of these things are part of my T-shaped lawyer framework, which is a framework of skills, competencies, qualities, mindsets, and knowledge. And you need all of those things, but you need them in different measures, and you need them, and the way you develop each of those things and the way that you use each of those things in your legal work and in your business work is different, which is why the distinction between those different dimensions of the T-shaped lawyer framework is so important. So, for example, if you take empathy, right? So, lawyers are not, generally speaking, known for their empathy. But you could spend a lot of time and money developing your empathy in a corporate legal environment setting, and it might help you perhaps if you're a manager or a leader, but it's going to take a long time to develop, and the payback, as it were, is maybe not going to be so immediate. Whereas if you combine empathy with, let's say, design thinking, and then you use design thinking in an appropriate, context, then of course you're going to get some real incredible benefits out of doing that properly. And empathy is critical on that. So in other words, I'm trying to explain that it's very important to distinguish between these different types, not to lump everything in as a skill, and to understand that you need to first figure out what sort of work you want to do. And so the second book and the T-shaped lawyer framework, which we don't have time to go into in too much detail today, goes into all that and in great detail and gives you a structured way of thinking about your professional development. And I've done, we've rolled that out with, law firms and legal departments who use it as the basis of their professional development. for all of their stuff, not just the lawyers, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. No, that's good. I like all the breakdown and differences. And, it's not necessarily, I mean, there's a place for T lawyers, there's a place for I lawyers, there's a place for, everybody. Right.
Good question. I get asked that, like, and maybe in the past that, you could afford to be an I lawyer, and particularly in a firm, but in a legal department, that's a luxury that, I challenge whether, unless you're in a very, very large legal department, it's a luxury that maybe you can't afford anymore to have someone who's just all they do is give legal advice. And that's a question of, is that the right sort of person to have on your team? Or do you need to have either help that person to transform into a T-shaped lawyer, or perhaps, dare I say, get someone who is, which goes to the question of hiring and, how do you look for these sorts of things?
Well, you did distinguish a little bit in your book about, I mean, there could be, I'm just throwing out an example for the potential I-shaped lawyer. There could be, a patent lawyer that all they're doing is patents and they don't really need to talk to anybody. They just need to make sure the company's patents are all done. There's thousands of patents and they're the right person because that's their skill. They just focus on that. And there isn't really a need for any of the T part.
Well, what I do say there, Lisa, is I give the example of, that's true, but even in an area like that where you've got a specialized role, so, patent lawyer, M&A lawyer, litigation lawyer, you can still find opportunities to do business work. And I gave the example in the book of, and this wasn't me doing this was when I was working with Citrix, where the IP patent lawyers, yes, they were helping with obviously filing patent claims and what have you, and building up a patent portfolio. But they realized that there was a problem, that, basically whoever shouted the loudest managed to get their idea patented. And that wasn't really a very good, very appropriate way of doing things. So it was the lawyers who led an initiative to set up a steering committee so that if someone wanted to have their idea patented, it had to be reviewed by the lawyer and the engineers and the management and what have you. And there was criteria. They developed some criteria to say, look, yeah, this is something that is important, for all sorts of reasons. So they were the ones who drove that process. And that's an example of a specialized lawyer who is specialized being able to do business work. So I say that even in a specialized role, you can and you should be a T-shaped lawyer. It's just a different way that you would do that to someone who's in a more general role.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good example. So if that's the case, then let's talk about the mindset some more, because I think the business mindset is probably a key to being a T-shaped lawyer, because a lot of lawyers, and we come out of law school and we think of ourselves as lawyers and we don't necessarily think of ourselves as business people until we get out in the world and we start learning a lot of things about what businesses really do and how they really operate. But there's some discussion in your book about the business mindset. And I wanted to hear you talk a little bit about that. And there's questions that you ask in there. For example, well, I'm a lawyer, I'm not a business person. So why would I need to do any, why would I need to learn any other skills, for example? And you have all these answers for all the obstacles to the business mindset. So what are kind of the key things, and how does a lawyer get that business mindset?
Right. Let me first sort of respond to one of the biggest obstacles to a lawyer having a business person mindset, and you touched on it, which is the fact that, let's face it, being a lawyer is a big part of, your identity, your personal identity, not just your professional identity. And that's understandable because, you've done well to get into law school, you've done well to get out of law school, to get a good job, and, you're rightly proud of being a lawyer. So make no mistake, I'm not suggesting that you don't be proud of being a lawyer. I think it's a great thing and it's a great asset to have. And as we were talking about earlier, a lot of the skills and the way of thinking that you develop as a lawyer can be used not just for legal work and legal advice, but for business work and business advice. Common sense, analytics, wading through a bunch of facts to get to the key facts, all those sorts of things. But the identity As I point out in the second book, and I refer to a book called The Adaptation Advantage, where they talk about the importance of being able to adapt. Literally, like from an I-shaped lawyer to a T-shaped lawyer, it's that sort of thing they're talking about, and how that's so important, and how you have to adapt in a world that's changing so much. But that identity is the biggest obstacle, one of the biggest obstacles. It's like, I think they refer to it as like an anchor that makes it very difficult to adapt from one person to another and to do different things. And so, yes, as lawyers, we have to sort of be proud of the fact that you're a lawyer, but don't necessarily wear that badge, I'm a
Yeah.
lawyer, and kind of, act like you're the lawyer. That's actually not the way that to inure yourself to your business colleagues and to be successful. So you need to put the badge away, and you need to sort of, act like a business person, speak like a business person, engage with them as an equal, not as a superior or as a smarter person or whatever. And that's the most effective way to become a business person. And then slowly over time, it's about then just, thinking about the business. And I kind of explain in the book on the business person mindset how it's about not just going in and focusing on your tasks that you have to do today, but, having your head up a little bit and kind of looking around and reading stuff and listening to what people are saying, even in a simple thing like in a meeting, just listening to what folks are saying and not just thinking about the NDA you've got to get through on the vendor contract and, what have you. Just every day is an on-the-job learning opportunity if you're in-house. And so, yeah, there are things you can do, and there's other things you can do as well to adopt this mindset.
There's other examples of other professions. Like you'll see a lot of engineers that are engineers. Their I is engineer, and they're obviously they think of themselves as business people because they're selling products or they're selling, their sales support or, whatever. So it's kind of a little bit similar to that. So
yeah, and that's where the T-shaped professional comes from. So for those of you who don't know, have never heard of this before, I didn't come up with the T-shaped professional concept. That's been around for a while, and it's been applied to pretty much every profession: engineers, accountants, marketing, HR. And the reason it's so popular is because companies, the executive management of companies, want their people not to be siloed and just doing their narrow thing. They want them to be able to collaborate with other functional leaders in order to solve these more complex problems, which are not just legal problems, they're business problems, and to exploit these business opportunities and to innovate for the company as a whole, not just the legal department or the firm. So that's why it's such a popular thing. And so when I came across that idea, it sort of captured, the very essence of what I was, what I experienced when I worked in-house, and also the very essence of the ideas that I was trying to convey in my workshops. I thought it just captures that very neatly, which is why I applied it to lawyers.
yeah. Yeah, and that's a good point. So yeah, and I just want to go through maybe my example a little bit because
Please.
I worked in a lot of roles, and I'm switching now to roles, legal and business roles. So I'm a lawyer by trade, and I probably did maybe it was 3 or 4 months I spent in a law firm, and then I never went and worked in a law firm again. That was during like I did like an internship or something, and then I literally went straight into business because I kind of have a knack for finding my own job. I've always sort of been that way. And in the business, you can be creative. I felt like, well, I can be really creative. All I have to do is show that I can add value and I'll get hired. Like it's, in whatever role it is. So I've been hired as, like a contracts manager. I have been hired as in-house attorney. Actually, I did do that role, very focused on regulatory type things and contracts and also some international strategic development because I was researching the laws in other countries and trying to figure out if it made sense for the company to go abroad. So things like that. So, but I just wanted to point out that anytime that I was adding value, and I'm going to give an example of one of the times I was able to add value using my legal background in the business setting, which I spent maybe 10 years of my career in a procurement function, and I was a director of procurement, and I was over supplier management, and my team was supporting the category managers. So one of the goals on all of the directors' scorecards was to save cost, right? Cost savings is always the goal on a supplier, a sourcing department's scorecard. So that, because I had that goal, and that's a business goal, right? That's a business goal. I could actually recommend lots of ways to frame the contracts so that eventually you would save costs in all kinds of terms and all kinds of, and a lot of a lot of strategy goes into that. So I would say, being in a business role, I was able to add value all over the place, more than I ever would have been able to do if I was just a straight in-house lawyer, right? I also got hired by the sales support team. So that was the business development team. And I got put on the partnership team, and I was on the sales team. And the sales team considered my value to be, I'm able to put all these documents together in a pretty good format. It hasn't been blessed by the legal department yet, but I'm still able to put it all together, and I'm able to insert a lot of considerations that no one else thought of, basically, because of other business areas that I was exposed to, or, whatever. I can't go into all the detail, but there's definitely a lot. So I was put on strategic teams, for example, like tactical strategic planning. Why? Because I could see A to B, how to get from A to B without any gaps. Okay. Because in law school, that's what we learn, right? We learn to get from A to B. We see gaps really well because that's and we were going to talk about law school too, but I just wanted to kind of focus on some of the different roles. So it's not, and you've been in non-legal roles too. So I'm sure that you have lots of those examples as well. But I also wanted to point that out just for the younger generation that might be listening, as far as their development of being a lawyer, and if they're interested in going into business, supporting, businesses, there's so many things that you can do as a lawyer with the legal training, with the T, when you include the T, that makes you a very effective, value adding person in that company.
Totally, Lisa. I mean, look, you clearly have a business person mindset. You clearly do. And you're a great example of the benefits of, being a T-shaped professional, in that it does it leads you to do much more interesting and exciting work, much more diverse work. You get to learn and grow. It opens up, career opportunities that frankly wouldn't exist if you were just a narrow I-shaped lawyer. And that's so important. And so, you are an example of exactly that, the value of that and how interesting that is. And that's the great thing, is that now, thankfully, there are much more diverse roles in legal departments and in law firms. I mean, legal departments, obviously the rise of legal operations, and there's a range of different roles there that didn't exist, that are really, really important roles that, frankly, they don't do legal work, they do business work. They do what I call internal business work, primarily benefiting the legal department. And that's important. But as I say, and it's important, by the way, for the lawyers to understand that work and support that work. One of the problems with a little bit at the moment is that kind of lawyers are washing their hands of that stuff and saying, if we have a legal ops person, I need to know about that stuff, and which is making it difficult for those in legal ops people in their roles. But also is a mistake, because if you want to be a senior lawyer in a legal department, you need to understand internal business work, and you need to be able to support it and ultimately to manage it if you're going to become a GC. But it's the client business work, not the internal business work, the client business work that I was talking about earlier, that's the real game changer for lawyers. And so I think it's exciting stuff, and it does have implications, as we kind of were hinting on, for junior lawyers. So the question I often get asked is, well, this is great, but what will this mean for law students, and what does it mean for junior lawyers? So maybe I'll just touch on that, shall I now? Is that a good time to talk about that?
Timing for that.
Yeah. So first of all, for junior lawyers, now obviously if you're a junior lawyer just coming out of law school, you've got your first job, you're a couple of years in or whatever, to start with, your primary focus will be on developing your legal skills, as it should be, and legal knowledge. And frankly, if you can get a job in a law firm, a good law firm, that's a great place to learn that. Legal departments struggle, frankly, to give you that quality of legal training. But over time, and bearing in mind, this is why it's important for you as junior lawyers to be thinking about the longer game, the long term here. As I pointed out, what the point that's going to make the biggest difference in your career is not actually going to be your legal skills. You're going to need to get those up to a certain level. But what's going to make the biggest difference, even in a firm, the managing partners of firms, yeah, they're great lawyers, but they're also very good business people. They know how to do business very well. And that's why they're in those positions. But certainly in-house, the people that succeed are people that are very good at business. And so that's why you need to start developing, and you can start developing using the T-shaped lawyer framework, for example, or non-legal skills at the same time. And that will give you a more focused way of doing that. Now, if we think about law students, so I'm actually, my books are now being used in various, university law schools around the world. And I'm talking at various universities. I've got one coming up here in Australia next week. And basically the pitch to the students can be summarized as the fact that, by all means, this is where you're going to learn some law. By the way, most of which you won't necessarily use in your job. I'm sure, remember all that stuff you learn, there's very little of that you actually end up using, but you learn a way of thinking that's important. But at the same time, you should also be looking for opportunities to learn, to pick subjects and maybe even courses that give you the ability to develop some non-legal capabilities. And the framework can give you some ideas around particular areas that might help you in that sort of thing. And then when it comes to work experiences, if you can get a job as an intern with a law firm, great. But if you can't, that's not the end of the world. If you think about being a T-shaped lawyer, if that's your end goal, which will give you all those, broad career options, then, frankly, doing any sort of business-related role is going to be really helpful for you. So it's not the end of the world if you don't get an internship with a law firm.
Yeah, and I would just maybe make a comment too about what we learn in law school. I mean, it is more about the way of thinking, not so much the material, because you do study all different subjects. You learn all about constitutional law, you learn criminal law, and you may not ever practice those areas. But having to go through all the cases that we do and argue in class and, find the issues all the time, to me, that's the most valuable thing is the way of thinking, because I could easily look at a business document and spot the issues. After law school, it's pretty, you have a skill for sure. And I would say issue spotting, developing strategies, and being able to think counterintuitively. There's so many things that were counterintuitive in law school. I remember the outcome of the case was so different. You just change one little fact, and it was so counterintuitive to think of it that way. So you think, everybody thinks they can figure out all these cases on the news and all this stuff. Well, really, when you actually dive into it, it's really probably the opposite of what you're seeing on TV, how it's really working out. So I think the biggest thing about law school is it twists your mind into thinking in a different way and in a very clear way. Very clear. Like you become a very clear thinker.
Yep.
You could apply to really anything that you ever wanted to do, including law or business or, anything really. I mean, I probably apply it every day to running my business because I'm pretty much a business entrepreneur, really is what I am. But it's so nice to know the legal and to spot issues. Like spotting issues is a major, major thing.
Well, in the book, I talk about these things that you learn in law school and in your legal work as assets. I call them business partnering assets. So they're assets that, like common sense, like all the things you mentioned. Being able to spot the issue, being able to wade through a bunch of facts and figure out what are the really crucial facts. Being able to critical thinking and problem solving and all those kind of things, skills. Are skills that you can apply those to legal work, but you can also apply them to business work. And that's, why limit yourself and that's a point of differentiation between often you and a lot of your business, colleagues and clients. So you have an advantage there that will help you to do that. But it's really basically about the idea of thinking of yourself, not just as a lawyer, as a business person, and not just limiting your contribution to your clients to just legal work and legal advice.
I don't know if that was your takeaway, but let me just ask you, I was going to do my takeaway question here. So if you could distill your approach into one guiding principle, what would it be?
That's probably it,
Mhm.
Lisa. That's probably it. Yeah.
Okay,
Just, yeah.
good. So just for the audience to understand how to get in contact with you, where to find your book, maybe your website.
Yeah, probably the easiest thing is just my website's T-Shape Lawyer, one word, tshapelawyer.com. So just you Google T-Shape Lawyer, you'll find me there. There's a lot of, more information about the stuff we've talked about today. There's some free articles that I've written. You can have a look at those.
Mhm.
There's links to the books that are both available on Amazon. And there's some, descriptions of some of the work that I do, the boot camps, the workshops, and then some client testimonials. So yeah, check them out and love to
So I
speak to you.
read, just to show the audience, so I read this book and there's a second book that I haven't read. So what's the difference between the first and the second book?
So that book, the one you've read, is What a T-Shaped Lawyer Is and Why It's Important for Every Corporate Lawyer to Become One.
Hmm.
And the second book is How to Be a Better T-Shaped Lawyer. In other words, what should you focus on in your professional development? That's that T-shaped lawyer framework of non-legal skills, competencies, qualities, mindsets, and knowledge, and how to develop it and how to use it in your legal and your business work.
Okay, good. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate being on. It was a great conversation and I'm sure it will be valuable to our audience. It's a very kind of a unique topic, but again, you're like my hero. You're a hero to me because you explain things that I've been doing for a long time in a concrete way. So I appreciate that. So thank you for your contributions. It's clear that cultivating a broad set of skills is not just beneficial, but essential for legal professionals navigating today's complex business environments. For our listeners at Intuitive Edge, Peter's insights are particularly resonant. Our ideal project attorneys embody the T-shaped characteristics, integrating their legal expertise with skills in project management, technology, operations, and business strategy to deliver exceptional results in M&A transitions. Their emotional intelligence and ability to operate across these disciplines not only drives success in our projects, but also highlights transformative power of the T-shaped lawyer in the legal profession. If today's discussion inspired you, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast for more insights into the art of M&A. Thank you for tuning in to M&A Plus, the art after the deal. We look forward to continuing our conversations with special guests and experts on how to navigate the complexities of M&A with innovative and strategic solutions. See you next time.